Welcome to the Secure Start podcast, brought to you by the Secure Start Aura apps, supporting trauma-informed care and practice at home and in school.
It wasn't really a case of them not knowing where they lived or not knowing about, their family of origin specifically. The biggest problem was why, and the other big problem was it was my fault. So what it makes it therapeutic really is that we have a high kind of concentration of meaning and exploration. In the therapeutic nature of this work, we follow, that notion of let's hear the child's story first before we share what we know. And I think that's the issue for us. We are wanting to help young people and adults to have a second look at the kind of events of their world, but not just from their internal kind of view, but from those also that acted with them during their journey. Life story work is often something written for a child. So the actual main character of that story does not have their voice in the story. So we owe it to our children, young people, to do our best to information bank as well as we can. A lot of our children are defined by the unknown or the unresolved past. So my job is to not necessarily resolve that past, but make that past much more accessible. And once you know something, actually it takes away the imagination of it. It takes away the horror sometimes. It takes away the kind of feeling of inadequacy because we now know it.
Welcome to the Secure Start podcast. I'm Colby Pearce, and joining me for this episode is a familiar name with an international reach. Before I begin this episode, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands that I come to you from, the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains, and acknowledge the continuing connection the living Kaurna people feel to land, waters, culture, and community. I'd also like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. My guest this episode is Professor Richard Rose. Richard is the director and founder of Therapeutic Life Story Work International. Therapeutic Life Story Work International provides consultancy and training on therapeutic life story work, working with hard-to-reach children and adolescents, and develops academic training programs in the UK and internationally. Therapeutic Life Story Work International also engages in research, supervision, and professional development of all members. Recently, Richard founded THEA, designed to provide funded training to all carers in the UK and across the world from May 2025. THEA will also offer cost-effective training for trauma, health and education colleagues to support their work with traumatised children and their families. Richard has worked with traumatised children and families since he was 17 years old, and in that time has been shaped by those he has journeyed with over the last 43 years. He qualified in social work in 1989 and since then worked in the UK in local authority child protection and from 1997 with the highly regarded residential therapeutic treatment agency SACS, including 4 years as the clinical practice director of the Mary Walsh Institute. Throughout his career, Richard has worked with children and families in out-of-home care and with birth family placements, with the aim of enabling these placements to become healthy and nurturing. Richard is a regular visitor to Australia, where he is an adjunct associate professor of social work and social policy at La Trobe University and honorary associate of the Berry Street organisation. He is also a regular visitor to the United States of America, where he has presented for the Portland State University and currently for the Department of Human Services in Oregon and its adoption services. Richard is the author of 4 books, as well as research and guest chapters in publications such as Children in Care and various papers within university press. Well, welcome, Richard, to the Secure Start podcast. Really pleased to have you here. Have heard your name and heard about your work over, well, more than a decade, it would be working in this space. So, welcome.
Thank you very much, Colby. It's lovely to be invited to talk with you today. And in fact, next year is my 30th year of doing therapeutic life story work. So it's been quite a big journey, but the last 10 years where it's really got to make the difference I hoped it would do.
Yeah, I think I probably first learned or first heard of it, yeah, probably in the area of 15 odd years ago, I'd have to
Mm,
say. So, yeah, people were talking about it. I mean, the concept of life story work, of course, has been familiar to me for longer, and I probably pricked my ears up, when someone talked about therapeutic life story work
mhm,
in a context where I was, more used to hearing about life story work. So maybe if we just start there, if you're happy to talk about how you developed therapeutic life story work,
mhm.
and perhaps and this would be leading into the second question that I was going to ask you, but which is around how it is how it is therapeutic, how it is distinguished from, I guess, what people have conventionally known as a life story book.
Of course. So for me, I mean, the start of the journey, I was a child protection worker, a social worker in a local team in England,
Hmm.
and we were called the Specials because all we did was to investigate potential child protection issues. And my skill in the latter part of that was video interviewing children. So I
Mm,
would video interview children on tape. And I loved that job. It was great. And I was in my own little bubble. And then, as all things, local authorities, departments like to shift things around a little bit. And I got shifted around a little bit and became a child protection senior social worker.
hmm.
And it didn't suit me at all. I remember one of my first referrals that came through to me, instead of looking at what the client needed and what the children would have benefited from, I was too busy looking behind them to see what they'd been up to.
Mm,
And that's that investigative head that was, obscuring my kind of more open approach, a holistic approach. So I made a decision to leave, and it's the only reason I left social care. And that was after starting at 17, working in a children's home. So it was quite a long
mm,
journey already, really, by that point. So in 1997, I was able to get a job in a residential organisation that at the time was called SACS. And
mm,
SACS was very well regarded. It was a sexual abuse child consultancy service, and
mm,
we were looking after young people between the age of 4 up to 12 on entry, and 15 when hopefully we did what we needed to do. So after 3 years, and it was a program of care, although residential, which included life story work.
mm,
But nobody knew what life story work was, so that was why I was brought in to start life story. Now, I had not really much idea about what that was, but
mm,
when I was a student social worker learning my craft, I was very, very lucky to be placed in a drug rehabilitation centre
mhm,
where they were doing history work with those adults that sadly had a long a journey of hurt really by the drugs and stuff that had overwhelmed them. And I really enjoyed that notion of hearing the stories. And what was quickly apparent to me as a student social work was how similar the stories were.
mm,
And most of those stories involved some form of child abuse, some kind of trauma that, as Gabor Mate would say, has just, been unresolved residue for many people, and
mm,
certainly for the people I was working with. So I thought when I got this new opportunity, it was again probably 12 years after I qualified, and I thought, oh, that's what we can do. So that was my initial. Um, we started with 32 children that we had in our organization, and by 2013 we had 72 children. But the unique selling area of this, I know that's an interesting word to use or words to use in
Mm,
childcare, but unfortunately, when you are offering a service, you have to make yourself unique in order to get the investment. And the unique bit was the life story work.
mhm,
But when it started, obviously, I read Thalberg. I read all about Edith Nichols' work, Jane Asher's work, and Ryan Walker's work. And that was really life story. And
mm,
life story gets called life history, life journey, life story. And so I kind of looked at that for a while, and I just thought with the children we were looking after, it wasn't really a case of them not knowing where they lived or not knowing
mm,
about, their family of origin specifically. The biggest
mm,
problem was why, and the other big problem was it was my fault.
yeah.
And so what I wanted to do was to try and do something different, which was to provide something that would help the young person to make sense of their story,
Mm,
but also to look at the whys, the whos, the wheres, the hows, to look at people's stories that journeyed with them. So what it
mm,
makes it therapeutic really is that we have a high kind of concentration of meaning and exploration. So it's not just you lived here and you moved to this place and it was because your carer, found it difficult to look after you. It's
mm,
actually, well, what did the carer actually find difficult? What was it that people did about that? What do you think people could have done about that? Then what happened next to you? And now do you make sense of that? Can we connect the two or the three or the four, depending obviously on that journey? The other side of the therapeutic, of course, was about healing. And
mm,
so many children that I've worked with as a child protection worker, and I worked as a residential worker, like many of us really, if we don't really understand something, we often blame ourselves.
mhm,
And I had not, only about a year ago now, I had a 9-year-old boy that said to me, Richard, I'm in care and my sisters are in care because I was born.
mm,
And so I wrote on wallpaper, is what we used to write everything down.
mm,
I wrote on the wallpaper, I told Richard I'm in care and my sister in care because I was born. So by writing, I
mm,
told Richard, I'm not agreeing with him. I'm just explaining that I've heard him.
mhm,
And he goes on to say something which is quite logical. I mean, what he said was social
mm,
workers, police, and health visitors weren't involved in my life, my children, sorry, my sister's life or my mum and dad's life. But when I was born, that's when
mm,
they got involved in my life. And if I hadn't been born, they wouldn't have come to my house. And if they hadn't come to my house, they would have seen the neglect. And if they hadn't come to my house, then my mum and dad wouldn't have got so angry with each other. And my sisters would still live at home. And it all makes a logic, And if you did life story work and you piece together, there's your logic. Um, so in the therapeutic nature of this work, we follow, that notion of let's hear the child's story first before
mm,
we share what we know. So if you like, Thalberg in 2015, oh no, 2012 said, if you really want to work with children, hear their story before you tell them. If you like,
mm,
Kierkegaard, all the way back to 1859, sorry,
mm,
1849, Kierkegaard would say, if you really want to help someone, then you have to find out where they're at. You have to then find out more than they know about themselves, and then you must hear their story before you continue. And of course, people we are very much involved with, like Bruce Perry would say, we need the child's narrative at the center of all we do. So having heard his narrative, I was then able to say to him, well, I've gone away and I've met with, or I've interviewed, or I've, recorded with your parents. And I met with your mum of origin. And your mum has told me that when she first met your dad, she was 16 years old and your dad was 36 years old. And he was a maintenance man that worked in the children's home, fixing the doors and the windows because they were often broken.
mhm,
And they ran away together, and everybody was not happy about this. And your mum remembers that people were very angry, people were very, kind of worried, but she loved your dad and she wanted to be with your dad. And she remembers that when she was first with your dad, he used to have lots and lots of worries around alcohol. And he used to drink
mm,
lots of alcohol, and the alcohol would sometimes mean that he would get very cross, And sometimes as he got cross, he would hurt mum. And mum remembers having to go to the hospital sometimes, and mum remembers having to go to the police station, and mum remembers dad having to go to the police station. And this little boy was listening to this
Mm.
as we were writing it down, and he looked at his carer because he always worked tripartite, and he looked at me, and then he turned around and he said, "Are you telling me that my mum and dad were fighting, hurting each other before my sisters were born, before I was born?" And I just
Mm.
looked at him and said, "Well, actually, I'm not telling you that. This is what your mum's telling us." And he looked at his carer and said, "So it wasn't my fault." And I
Mm.
think that's the issue for us. We are wanting to help young people and adults to have a second look at the kind of events of their world, but not just from their internal kind of view, but from those also that acted with them during their journey. And if we can find a way that children can or adults can understand why, who, where, what, how, and when, we'll make a big difference. We very often have young people say to us things like, "So it's not my fault," or "I think I like me," or "Actually, it must be really tough for my mum and dad, but it doesn't have to be tough for me." So I think it's those kind of unique ways we work that make this very successful, and it is very successful. We have some lovely research that supports that now from Deakin University in Melbourne as an
Mm.
example.
Mm. And you've referenced other people that are in the history of the children, including birth parents, for example. I mean, how
Mm.
do you access that
Yeah,
information? And tell us a little bit about what goes into building that picture for the children.
sure. So the therapeutic life story work, the model that we use, which is now referred to as the Rose model, and I've got over it now, Colby. But at the beginning, I wasn't that happy. Those people that know me well know that
Yeah.
I'm fairly grounded. I have a wife, maybe
Mm.
like yourself, that keeps me where I need to be, and so at the end of the day, kind of this Rose model that we work is really very systemic. It's very kind of grounded in its approach, and it is a step by step. So
Mm.
basically, we have three particular tasks. The first task is information gathering. So we
Mm.
refer to this as information banking. So we shouldn't ever work with a hurt person without understanding their story, without understanding their history. And that means that we have to make the effort to collate what we can. So the way that we do this is that we get a substantive report. So it might be an adoption report, it might be
Mm.
a report from the court, it might be a report of a current summary. We
Mm.
break that down into bite-sized chunks like you would eat an elephant. And then we think of each chunk individually and ask ourselves, what would we need to know that would help us make sense of this particular
Mm.
information? So that might mean that, it's about, let's say, mum and dad splitting up. That might be that box. So we'd want to know, well, what led to that challenge? What was happening for mum? What was happening for dad? How does that impact on those around the family? And then we would also, with those questions we raise, plot them literally on a
Mm.
big eco map, like a map with a kind of name of the child in the middle and all these spider legs coming out with
Mm.
all the people and all the paperwork around them. And we literally attach each question to the line that leads to the individual or the paperwork.
Mm.
And then all I do is I either go and see that person, I invite the opportunity to Zoom or to have a telephone call or to write, and I gather up the paperwork. And then through that notion, we are able then to get real time. We get memories, we get memorabilia, like for instance, photographs for shoes, lots of cultural elements. So we're working with people from different cultures. We want to make sure that we honor the culture. So we would be talking about important parts of their culture that we can bring back with us. There may be ceremonies, there may be belief systems, there may be things that are really important like dream time, etc., etc. We bring those back, but not for us, but as they are shared with us, we can say to the young person or adult, "I met with your auntie, and your auntie remembers looking after you when you were 10. And when you were 10, you were full of questions and you were full of interesting things. And what you did was, with your auntie, you produced a scrapbook all about you. We've got that scrapbook. It's that kind of thing.
Mm,
So if you look at it in a way which I refer to as gathering up the fragments of our children's lives. And when I first got the job back in 1997 for Saks,
mm,
my boss at the time said to me, I don't know how you're going to do it, but I know what I want you to do. So my instructions were very simple. Go out, gather up the broken shards of children's worlds, bring them all back into one place, make
mm,
sense of them, and then share that with the child and the carer. And in a way, we haven't really changed too much, but we now call it, making sense of fragmented lives. So what we're now saying is we can't really make sense of a young person unless we have all those parts that the young people have left behind back into the same place. So that's the
mm,
first part. And that might mean that we see birth parents, we might see previous carers, we might look at files, we might go to court and ask to see court bundles. We have to be mindful of the data protection, we have to be mindful of people's rights and responsibilities. And so
mm,
we are very careful and very, what's the word I would use, respectful.
mm,
I might, for instance, want to see a mum of a child, and mum is not in a place where she could see me in a way that would be in her best interest. We wouldn't go see mum. I might be in a situation where I might be interviewing a dad, and dad becomes overwhelmed. I wouldn't, want to take advantage of that, or I wouldn't want to, in any way, become unprofessional with that. So we would stop the interview, and so on and so on.
mm,
And a bit like, when you do these interviews, Colby, you make sure that people have a right to ensure what they've said is okay. We do
mm,
the same when we interview adults. We will send back to them what we believe they've told us,
mm,
and then hopefully come back and say, that's right, or you got that wrong, or I don't want to share that. So there is a lot of
mm,
autonomy to the interviewee as much as there is for the young person we work with.
mm,
The other problem we have, of course, when we information gather is issues of privacy. And again, if I have a parent that says, I do not want you to tell this child this,
mhm,
I can't tell that child that.
mm,
If it's something that's really important, then I would do all I can to persuade the information giver the importance of it. So, as an example,
mm,
sadly, many of our young people may have been born as a result of their mother's own abuse, whether that be rape or whether that be other things
mm,
within a relationship. And the mother might not want us to tell their young person that that's how they
mm,
came into the world. But the young person may have real issues around bonding, real issues around that relational context between mum, that knowing that this happened might help that child to understand, where mum is, kind of coming from. So you've got this difficult thing of whose story is
mm,
whose story. Again, what we do is we try to negotiate, we try to um, make sense of what we might share. So very often I'll go back to an interviewee and say, this is how I'm going to explain this to the young person. Are you okay with this? So it's full of respect, it's
mm.
full of value, it's full of hopefully, thinking of the best interest, not just of the child, but of all those that we come to.
Yes.
So that's the first part of the intervention. It's
Mm,
a very, very important part, but it
mm,
means we have evidence, but we also have statements, we have words, we have, kind of physical things all in one place where we can then make sense.
Do you mind if I just jump in there, Richard? Because there's a
Mm,
number of things that have come up while, for me, while you've been talking, and from my own work in this area for a very long time. I've got a question. I'm wondering if you could, in a moment, uh, I guess, share with us what has been the general experience and reaction of birth parents in particular, but other people involved in the history of children, a child's life, of going through this process. But before I get you to answer that, I just wanted to say this, which is very early in my career as a practicing clinical psychologist in this space, I learned the value of not relying on what's in the documentation.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember, and yeah. So, for example, I might be asked to do a case review and express an opinion um, um, based on what is in the documentation.
Mhm.
And then, say, sometime later, maybe a year later, I'm asked to do a full assessment. And I found that I could come to a completely different conclusion based on what is in the case notes of a child
Mhm.
versus when I actually go and speak to the people. And that was very early in my career, and probably, along the way, one of the best things that ever happened in my career was to be able to rely less on what's in the
Mm.
paperwork. And people will, sorry, I did, people will
No,
often
no.
say, birth parents and others will often say, that they were not fairly represented in the
Mm.
paperwork. So that got me thinking. What has been your experience and the people who follow this model's experience
Yeah.
generally of speaking to birth parents and others?
Yeah, so if we kind of stick with that first part of information gathering,
Mm,
I cannot agree with you more about what you said about files, but I have to put my own hand up.
mm,
When I was a social worker, child protection, I was renowned for being a get up and go social worker.
mm,
I was not very good at writing, and I was not very good at recording.
mm,
And I'm old now, so I could probably get away with this. I would have three colors in my drawer, and when anybody was coming to inspect my files, I quickly wrote up my files. Now,
mm,
there's an admittance of very poor practice, but I could give you lots of reasons why, but we won't go down there.
mm,
It was not good, and I own that. But also, because social workers who are very much the authors of files, really, because they have so much pressure on them, because they are really at the beck and call of a liquid diary. All the best intentions of the world, recording is the lowest.
mm,
Now, years ago, when I first practiced, we would have support in files, and we would have our administration teams that would, our clerks that would be next to us. And
mm,
I'm awful when I say this. I used to have somebody that would put everything in my files for me, and I would
mm,
just sit with them for an hour, and that was fantastic.
mhm,
Anyway, enough of my poor practice. The really issue is that I learned a long, long time ago that we all have this notion of explicit memory, and that what we might believe today, once we set it out into the world and then repackage it back in, is slightly different.
mm,
And so many people write in files with values and kind of different kind of viewpoints and different professional and social experiences, that they will write the files in the way that they see the files. And because
mm,
we're in a system where it's very rare for a child to have just one social worker or one person written their files. When you read a file from beginning to end, it is very, very confusing. So
mm,
although we take that information and we do value that information, and it does give us, a understanding of the reasons why action was taken, is it the truth? Well, there's no such thing as truth. Is it a perception? Yes.
mm,
And so if it's a perception, we owe it to that young person to get other perceptions. And like you were saying, with a mum, for instance, if you interview a mum several years after a child sadly might have been removed from her, she will not have the same memory of what happened when the child was removed to the memory
mm,
she now has, because she has to live with that memory. And so we do have situations, understandably, where people will have a memory of something that may well be kind of shaped by the years that have passed. Nonetheless, they have a story. And often I found that those stories that I get from the carers of children and from the parents of children and those that have journeyed with children are far more reliable than what I found in a file. So I, like you,
mm,
I do court reports every now and then on what we call therapeutic needs assessments,
mhm,
and I've been asked to do paper reviews, and I won't do them
mm,
because you don't get, as you said yourself, Colby, you don't get a flavour of the kind of holistic. You get a singular view, And if I could just link that back to life story work, because I know today it's also about the difference between life story work and therapeutic life story work.
Mm,
Life story work is often something written for a child.
mhm,
So the actual main character of that story does not have their voice in the story.
mm,
And in the UK, we are mandated to do life story work with children in care, quite rightly. But the way that most people do that is by providing a story. And
mm,
sadly, it's just another story on top of
mm,
countless other stories that didn't actually say to that child, and what do you think and what do you feel and what does that mean for you? And in court reports, we should do exactly the same. We should go and speak to the actors in the story and say, help me to understand.
mm.
And he said, she said, so no problem, because many times I say to my children, your dad said this, your mum said this, your social worker said this. The child says, but they can't all be telling the truth. And I say that actually none of them are telling the truth. What they're telling is their perception, what they believe to be what happened. And your job and my job is to try to make sense of it. And if we can, that's great. And if we can't, we can just honour everybody's view, but we'll come out with our own. And that's kind of
Mm.
how we would do it.
Yeah, yeah. And the other thing is agency imperatives as well get very much mixed into what I guess comes out in court document. I mean, no agency is going to go into court without having a good case, developing a good case formulation for taking the
Mhm.
action that they do. So, yeah,
But,
there's
but
all
you could
these
put that a different
layers.
way. Yeah, but you
Mm.
could put that a different way, Colby, and that's why the podcast, because we have this conversation. You could do it a different way, which is that, when a parent goes to court, they have a solicitor telling them what they shouldn't say,
Yes, it's of
because,
course.
of all the reasons that, might spring to mind right now. When I go see a parent, there is no solicitor.
Mm.
And what we often hear is the things that they wish they could have said. And to be
Mm.
honest, a lot of those kind of wish I could have said would have made much more of a kind of difference if it had
Mm.
been aired at the time it was felt. So again, I mean, for me, as I have, I own my own poor practice back in the day. But I would also say, that um, if you sit with a young person and you're doing therapeutic life story work, you have no right to do that if you don't understand the history of that child and their
Mm.
journey, and you haven't gathered up the stories of those who've journeyed with them. Because all you're likely to do is to reaffirm something that maybe in time proves to be false.
Mm.
I'll give you an example. We had this a long time ago now, but a young person, her file said that mum was heavily pregnant, mum had a car crash, and she went to hospital. And the next thing in the files, it says this child is born premature.
Mm.
And if you haven't got any other information and you're writing a child's story, the chances are you're going to put in the story, mum was involved in a car crash, she was sent to hospital, and it was felt that you should be born early, and therefore there was a cesarean, you were born early.
Mm.
Um, but when I got that information, I went back to mum and spoke to mum about this situation. Mum said to me, I was in a relationship with somebody I wish I was in a relationship with, and the night before I was rushed to hospital, he beat me. Now, I would never have known that if I hadn't gone to see
Mm.
mum. It wouldn't have been necessarily in any medical records. It would not necessarily have been in a social work record, but it's mum's story. And actually, for me, if I'd gone with the one that makes sense, if you like, that kind of assumed story, and that child goes home, which many of our young people do, even if it's just to be curious. And she says,
Mm.
"Oh, I did life story with Richard Rose, and look at my life story book, mummy, and I could have died if you weren't taken to hospital." And then mummy
Mm.
says, "That never happened." And if
Mm.
mummy can prove that, which she probably will be able to, then the child thinks the rest of the book is probably a lie. So
Mm.
we owe it to our children, young people, to do our best to information
Mm.
bank as well as we can. And we spend not time-wise 3 months, but we spend up to 3 months hoping that all this information will come back from our various kind of pieces of work. And that fits nicely in our model because the second part of our model is the
Mm.
direct work with children. And the first 6 sessions, which takes 3 months, once every 2 weeks, is 3 months. And therefore, we get to know the child, we're hearing their story, while things are coming in. And that means, of course, that we can start to piece together the holistic nature of this child's journey, and we can bear witness to their own understanding.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, just sitting here listening to you talk about it. It's really incredible. And the other thing that the another thought that I was having was how potentially therapeutic it is for birth parents and
Oh,
others
mhm.
to be given that opportunity. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is what we're doing now, and it's fantastic, Colby. So I work with two adults currently, but I've just finished working with an adult whose children and she were involved in a cult,
Mm,
and she wasn't called mum; she was called by her first name. Her children weren't her children; they were the children
mm,
of the cult, and the leader of the cult was, in fact, her husband. And there was a big
mm,
challenge, and the children come into care. And I did some work with one of the young people, and then I've worked with the mother, and she is amazing. She is an amazing woman. What she's been through is incredibly amazing. And what we did there was exactly what I talked to you about, information gathering, and then, hearing her story. And she has to defend herself. She has to, try to find a reason why things happen the way they happened. But if we do our job really well and we could start to, do that Gabor Mate, hearing, holding, and loving,
mm,
maybe we can help make more sense. And I'm really pleased to say that particular mum and that particular young person now have contact, whereas
mm,
they had no contact for 9 years. So we can make not only a difference to the young person, we can make a difference to the parent. So here in the UK, I'm sure you have the same with Australia. We have various organisations within local authorities who are doing work with edge of care or parents where they've lost their children in the notion of lost
mm,
to adoption or fostering, and they're doing work directly with the adult, because if they then go on to have another young person, hopefully they will have that opportunity to reflect on their journey of their own and make those decisions and those kind of life choices, which will enable them to feel much more able and much more confident in being a parent. In
mm,
our work, I say this often to my young people, I don't work really with the hurt child. I mean, yes, we are working with a hurt person, but I'm really working with the emerging adult. And if we can
mm.
break the cycle by helping a young person grow into all that we can be, hopefully I'll make myself redundant eventually.
Redundancy is
Hopefully.
a concept that I use a lot to describe psychotherapy endeavors that, ultimately you're
Perfect.
always trying to work towards being redundant in the life of the child.
Hopefully.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. And we do get
that's the
sacked.
idea. Yeah, we do get sacked sometimes, and
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I wonder. I know I'm harping on about this a little bit, but I think it's really important to see the value in what birth families can give,
Hmm.
even if a child or young person isn't living with them, and
Mm.
may not indeed still be safe to live with
Yeah.
them. I
Hmm.
do I do wonder about the adults, because we know that foster carers often also have their own care history. I do
Yes.
wonder whether, some of the carers that you interview and the birth parents that are interviewed through this process, whether some of them just say, I wish someone had gone through this kind of process with me.
Yeah, we have this all the time, but it's also actually not just with our carers, our foster carers, for instance, and may have their own experiences, and mums and dads. It's also kinship
Mm,
carers, it's
yeah.
connected carers, residential carers. Sometimes, most of us get into this world of working with hurt.
Mm,
Because either A, we've had our own experience of it, or
hmm
B, that we feel that we are able, to make a difference. It's
mm,
for me, a very vocational journey. And it's always been led by what I hope to be from the heart, not necessarily anywhere else.
mm,
And when you do any relational work, the context is relational. And so you're going to, work with adults, the children you might be working with, and you're going to see their vulnerabilities, you're going to see their kind of challenges, you're going to see their belief systems, or maybe the effect of vicarious trauma, on them. And it is also often the case when I'm working with, a carer, as an example, where the carer, contacts me after a session and says, "This happened to me."
Mm,
you know, and I've never been able to talk about it. And again, then you've got a challenge there because, can that adult still keep safe and help that young person?
yep.
Or are we going to be working with the adult through the young person?
Mm,
So there has been many a time where I've done therapeutic life story work with the adult carer,
mm,
then with the young person. And years ago, novelly wise, I had a son and a mum where the son, had been in care. Mum had not been in care, but had a horrendous history. And so the son and I did mum's story together. And then when the son is in mum's womb, in her story, we swapped over, and then mum and I did son's story. And that kind of combination of understanding each other meant that we had this beautiful sharing life, sharing stories moment. And what I
mm,
love about my job and what I see and why I still do it and love it is that, you see in front of you a carpet of attachment being woven. And for me, that's what we see. We see this notion of connection. Um, One of the things that I talk a lot about in my kind of practice is kind of attachment and the importance of understanding attachment, but it's also about how we can be promoting that attachment between children and carers, where for whatever reason it's got kind of lost.
mhm,
So our work, Colby, not many people, kind of connect this until they are involved with us. We go into a family when it's a mess. We
mm,
don't wait for things to calm down. We go in when it's very, very heightened. So most of my work is with placements that are sadly breaking apart,
mm,
and going in there and holding and role modeling and almost arbitrating between two forces, and then
mm,
bringing those forces together, and then suddenly the forces that are together now say to you, "We don't need you anymore," is a wonderful kind of process.
mm,
A girl once said to me through her wallpaper, which is a life story worker that came to help me think about my life and what happened to me when I was younger. He likes to help people he likes to help children and their families get closer together. Um, he's done that really well, but I don't need him anymore.
mm,
And that
mm.
was it. She sacked me.
Yeah.
So, I think that answering that question around the value of the work with a carer or with a parent is there. The other thing, of course, as you know, working with families, is that there's a lot of psychosocial education going on, and
Mm,
carers are watching you, and they really want you to mess up so that you understand what it feels like. And
yeah.
also, of course, you want to be able to say to them, hey, I can see this is really hard for you all. So
Mm,
that kind of way in which we can almost do that theraplay without theraplay. We can almost sort of like not coach, but role model, if you see what I mean,
mm,
using therapeutic language, using a lot of, Dan Hughes and Kim Gold will be happy here, using a lot of pace.
mm,
But I think that the bottom line, and it comes in one of the things you talked about, right at the beginning, which led on to it's relational. And as Perry
mm,
would say, you don't get trauma recovery without relationship.
mm, mm. I do. It's fascinating. My mind has now gone a little bit to, are there any kind of circumstances or situations where you probably wouldn't lead off
Hmm.
with therapeutic life story work? And in particular, my mind is going to blend it in a little bit with what you've just said now. Um, um, are there situations or circumstances where the adults in the life of the child would would find it very difficult to be
Hmm.
fully part of the process because it
Yeah.
would be quite triggering of their own
Hmm.
life
Yeah.
history? Yeah, life story.
So there are quite a few different reasons why we might not do it. So
Mm,
first of all, of course, the information gathering. it should always be done, because so often we are firefighting and we
Mm,
don't look back at the lessons that we need to learn. So we're just repeating and repeating. So by just gathering up all that information, even if you don't go and do therapy life story work, is valuable and also saves an awful lot of money. And I can't tell you how many times I've done information banking on a young person that's in a very expensive residential placement, and they don't need to be there. Yeah. But because they have this persona, which is, oh, we can't manage him, or he's settled, we'll leave him where he is,
mm,
isn't actually in his best interest. So I think what I would say is that that first part of our TLSW is a
mm.
standalone as much as a part of the process. And so I would recommend that. But let's say we go to the second part, and that's the direct practice, which is
Yes.
for a therapy life story work is 18 sessions, so 9 months of work, one session for 2 weeks. But we also do a more about me, which is a shortened version, which actually
Mm,
deals with a particular issue a child might have. So if I go with the big one first, if I meet with a young person and that young person tells me they don't want to do it, we don't do it.
mm,
There's no point. All we're doing is we're kind of working with something that that child is not able to manage, and therefore it will create more challenges than not. So what we recommend is what we recommend for every child in care, an all about me book process, which is our first part of our kind of shopping space. All
mm,
about me, by the way, is going all the way through Australia now. It's so lovely. We're seeing it in McKillop, Berry Street, a Uniting Care Benevolent Society. And what
mm,
it is, it's a template booklet, 20 pages in length. The carer sits with her child, they fill it in, and then 6 months later, they update it. And six
mm,
months later, they update it. And as that child journeys through care, let's say they were 2 when they first come into care, and let's say, sake of argument, they leave at 18 years of age, they'll end up with 32 20-page booklets telling the story of their journey through care. So
mm.
many of our children leave care with nothing.
Nothing.
So this way, they leave care with their story. And in England, our inspector service acknowledge this as life story work, and it is. It's beautiful. It's so easy. What's
Mm,
good about that bit, very briefly, is of course, if a child is in care at 2 and they, for whatever reason, need to leave that family to live in another family, they now have a passport.
mm,
And so they could share their 4 books with their new family, and their new family will know what they like, what they find difficult, what their favorite color is, what their favorite food is, all these beautiful things. In Oregon, where we've been doing this for a long time now, carers do their own books. And in England and in other places, us workers, we do our own books. So again, when we meet children, we can say, "This is me, and who are you?" So that all about me, I would do if a child said no. I would do one with the carer for them in the hope it would say to them, but you are somebody, you are worthy, you are, able and you're lovable, that kind of internal
mm,
model stuff. So if it then went on to the big piece of work and a child would say, I don't want to do it, I won't do it. If
mm,
we're working with a young person and they are neurodivergent from what we would say in England, medium to high, so fairly impacted by that neurodivergence, we have not found a way yet to work with a child where there may be those challenges. We're still looking. We work with many organizations to try and find a way. But we
mm,
have modeled medium to low. And in fact, we're doing some incredibly good work with young people that other people would have said, there's no way they can do this. As an
mm,
example, one I did about 5 years ago, sorry, 6 years ago, that child's just started a university degree studying
mm,
law. Yet
mm,
when I first met him, I was told he can't manage. So I
mm,
think that I would say to anybody thinking of doing life story work, don't follow what it says on the tin,
mhm,
be curious, be thoughtful, be kind of guided, but don't be led. With carers, if we're working with older young people, they don't sometimes want their carers there. But
mm,
I always try and work with me, carer, and child, so they're like a tripartite. And when I say carer, I mean anybody. So I work with 3 children who are in their birth family, never been in care before, so they're still carers
mm,
in this notion. So you've got this tripartite. But sometimes children, older children will say, I don't want my mum or my dad, or I don't want my carer here, because they want
mm,
to talk about their family of origin. And it might be torn loyalties, it might be they don't want to get their parents into trouble. So what we do there is we might start with, okay, well, we'll begin the session all together. Then, your carer can step out. We'll do some together, and then your carer can step back in again. And that works very, very, very often. But because of the notion of trauma, and because of people who, carry their trauma, sometimes not understanding that, there are times where a carer might be overwhelmed by, and at that point, if it impacts on the child's journey, we might stop and we might turn around and think, okay, what is the best way forward? So that might be to carry on the young person's journey without their carer present, or it might be that we do some work with the carer and then we come back to do work with the young person. Um, and that does happen. So I remember one person I worked with many years ago now, and halfway through the program, if you like, for what a better word for this intervention, she just said, "I can't do this. I am um, full of that my children's trauma." And then she wasn't full of those children's trauma. It had unlocked her own trauma. So again, with some psychological help from the fostering agency, with some care for the carer, and allowing the children to continue to work with me on their own, meant that we were able then to, acknowledge and separate out a really important piece of work with the needs of the carer. So that could be a process. Finally, the other way it could end, and that is that sometimes we do have situations where um, we're doing our work, is going very, very well, and then we might have an issue where maybe a young person has been on social media with their family of origin, and no one's aware of it, and then of course it comes up in the session. And then at that point, it might well be that we can't carry on the work we're doing because what we're doing is being compromised by what's happening in the external world. And so I will often go and see the external world if they'll see me to try to rescue that. But there are times where, it's unfair to tell a child what, has happened in their world when they're getting a completely different view from somewhere else. And at that point, we would probably go to what we call my story so far, and we would stop. And then hopefully, once that's played itself out, which doesn't take that long really, the child then says, "Can I now continue?" And so we finish the work off at that point. So there's been a break. It doesn't happen often, I have to be honest. In my own work, I can only think of about four or five probably in the last well, I've been independent since 2011, so what's that now?
25
15 years,
years.
16
I
years.
think, yeah.
Uh,
That's
yeah,
my
yeah,
maths.
about
I
50,
said
that's
25,
okay,
but
don't worry. So about 15, 16 years, probably had about four or five that I've stopped because of that. And it's social media. And it's just not helpful for that young person. So we just call it the story so far. So those would be the reason we would not finish. But I have to say that, the majority of young people and their carers, once we get into the direct practice, once they see, the story and once they understand what their young person has experienced, once they see how that young person feels the world is shaped around them, carers will say to me, I never knew that he thought it was his fault, or do you know how much pain that my child's holding? And we'll do little tools like behavior trees, which actually are helping carers and children to understand that how we behave is communicating, how we're traveling, and how we're traveling is defined by the past. So if we can understand the past, we won't need to worry about our behaviors because those that aren't useful to us will fall away. And I also have this little thing called Ghosts and Monsters, which is probably too much to talk about on a podcast. But a lot of our children are defined by the unknown or the unresolved past. So my job is to not necessarily resolve that past, but make that past much more accessible. And then we could say, does it still, sit with you? Um, Finally, on that, in the direct practice, we often will work with children who have extreme behaviors. A girl that I used to work with, I've written about a few times now. She was terribly hurt by her family of origin. But what she learnt was that when she acted in the way that she'd been hurt, adults around her would get very worried, would get very scared. And so if she was, sort of sexually active, then everybody would go, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. And when she was in a placement, I was working with her. It was her seventh placement, sorry, eighth placement, and she's only like six, almost six. And the carer brings back a friend for a cup of tea, and this girl, makes a beeline to this friend and starts being very sexual with them. And the carer saying, "I just can't do this anymore. This child cannot live with me anymore. I can't, have this." And by doing the tree, by saying, well, look, let's look at these behaviors she has, include the sexualized behaviors. Now let's look at her past. And I help the carer see that actually what this child is doing is very, very clever. She has this adult threat in her world. She has to get rid of
Mm,
it. And the one thing she's got that might drive this person out of her house is this overt behavior. Because most people, if you've got a 6-year-old trying to touch you or grab you or show you whatever,
mm,
you're going to get overwhelmed quite quickly if you're healthy and you'll get out. And if you get out, the threat's gone. I'm now safe with mummy and nobody can hurt me. And the carer just looked at me and she said, I want to say you're wrong, but you're not wrong. I can see this
mm,
now. So how do I do this? And I said, well, you need to look at that concept of your little girl and how she sees her world. And so we talk about Fonagay or we talk about,
mm,
Bentovim, where they talk a lot about, you and I, for instance, when we do our assessments, we do our professional job. And then we need to stand in the shoes of our children or our carers and think, what does the world look like from your view? How is it that you see what's going on? How do you understand
mm,
this? And I think in life story work, we don't have that, but in therapeutic life story work, that drives our practice. How is this seen by you? How would I be if I was in your shoes? Help me see the world as you see it. And so the more that we explore that world, the more that we understand behaviors. And as Beverly James, all those years ago said, all behaviors communication. Once we understand
mm.
what that child's communicating, well, as again, Dan Siegel would say, we're naming, we're taming, and we change behavior.
Yeah, yeah. So it's not always the case of, and would I would guess that you would say that more often it is the case that the process assists contemporary care of the children to have a better
Hmm.
understanding of what's going
Oh,
on
yes.
with their behavior, and that
Hmm.
far from being overwhelming for and triggering or traumatizing for the carer is
Yeah.
actually a relief is a
Yeah. I mean,
relief.
I remember being in Queensland back
Mm,
in 2008 when I first came to Australia to do talking about life story work, and 59 times later, my last visit was in May last year,
mm,
and it was amazing to meet so many kind of dedicated people working with the most hurt of our community. But I met with the then children's minister or one of the children's ministers in Brisbane. And I said to him, look, I'm really concerned because, just like we have in England, we have the same problem, by the way. We put our most challenging, most needing, most vulnerable children in the care of people, but we don't tell them anything about them.
mm,
And so they have to guess, they have to kind of work out, or if
mm,
they've looked after a similar child, they might assume that child's had the same experience. And of course, trauma is unique, and we need to understand each child is unique. And the minister agreed with me, and the minister said, well, yes. And I said, so what can we do to help our carers to make sense of, the things that have happened to the children they may be caring for? And a bit of that is what we'll go on to talk about in a bit, maybe the care excellence program.
mm,
But because of that, when I was, kind of designing life story work, what I wanted to make sure was that when we worked with a child and their carer, that carer understood that child's past. And so what we have is so many eureka moments, and once you know something, actually, it takes away the imagination of it. It takes away the horror sometimes. It takes away the kind of feeling of inadequacy because we now know it. And because you and I, in our work, for instance, we would hold that space, as Winnicott talks about, that I'm not overwhelmed by you. That's quite, nice to be able to share with a carer that, your
mm,
child needs to see that you're not overwhelmed by them. That doesn't mean you're a robot. That doesn't mean you
mm,
are kind of not feeling their emotions. What you're doing is you're saying, I'm here to keep you safe.
Mhm.
But when it comes to the big question of re-traumatizing, which is a giant question in this direct work as well, of course, where we're getting children or young people or adults to think about what happened to them. Um, I kind of go to two places really. One is again Vera Fahlberg. So Vera Fahlberg wrote a beautiful book called A Child's Journey Through
Mm.
Placement, and it's just lovely. And in that book, which she first wrote in 1984 and then updated all the way up to 2012, and she says the very fact that we hesitate to talk to children about their trauma implies to that child that even we can't manage it,
Mm.
but they live and continue to live that trauma. So that's always guided me. The other thing is, and I've learned this through experience now, it is very, very, very hard actually to re-traumatize an already traumatized child. But you can, and
Mm.
absolutely you can. And you can if you don't do your background, you don't do your preparation, and you just go straight in and tell a child something pretty awful without a relationship, without opportunity of, being that kind of strong counterpart that could hold you while you take the risk of talking. Um, Again, an example, just so I can share it with you. Often we're asking our social workers to do the most impossible things. And I remember being involved in a case where a young person had to be told that his grandfather was his father and that he had abused this child's mother.
Mm.
And the social worker had no idea how to do this because it is a really difficult
Mm.
space. How do you talk to children, young people, about sex? But then how do you talk about sex where it is, kind of a violence or it is a hurt? And so this social worker had no idea, and I don't blame her at all because we're not good at training social workers in how to communicate with
Mm.
traumatized children. We're just not good at it. We don't do it in university. We think we pick it up in the job, but we don't. And so this social worker, like many social workers, and for me sometimes in my past, we procrastinate, we procrastinate, we procrastinate. The day before it was coming to court, the court office contacted the authority and said, do these boys know? Because it's going to be talked about in open court. They hadn't
Mm.
told them. So they went to their house at 8 o'clock that night and sat the children down and they said to the children, I've got some really bad news for you. I've got to tell you the courts and the judges maybe tell you your granddad is your dad. He had sex with your mum. And then the worker said, I'm sorry, I've got to go now. And she left. Now that is re-traumatizing. But you could have done exactly the same thing in the sense of telling these children, but by doing that in a way which is safe, which is holding the space. And the way to do that, of course, is to create that relationship first. And
Mm.
once you have that relationship, when that child knows that you could hear these things without feeling, kind of disappointment or anger or sadness, but you could hold that child and they believe you can do that, then you could tell a child anything. And of course, in my work, I talk about death, I talk about sex, I talk about loss and separation. Um, but in a way, hopefully, that's accessible, but also that relieves that trauma, not, impacts on it. And as you and I both know, when we do our life story work, everything goes on the wallpaper. So if we externalize from what we're carrying, that residue that Gabor Mate talks about, if we can externalize that residue onto the paper, a bit like a giant
Mm.
memory jar, but it's not going anywhere, and we can work through it slowly and methodically, is no longer a trauma as such. It is something that happened to me that made me feel this way. But now I understand it. And now it's something that I can make sense of. It no longer weighs me down.
Mm.
And I think that, a lot of the reason we do that second part, that wallpaper role, is because what we're saying to a child is life is tough. And if you carry it in you, you're not going to have much time for the now. And so when we do the wallpaper work with children, the first thing we see change for children of school age is they manage school. They start to do well in school because all that preoccupation they've been carrying is now being drained away and they're able to listen, they're able to make sense, they're able to concentrate. And of course, I haven't met a child I've worked with that isn't incredibly clever because they've had to be clever to survive. So once you don't have to worry about survival, that skill can then be, kind of transferable to something that they can do incredible things with. So I
Mm,
think that, yes, you can re-traumatize children doing life story work, but you have to try. But if you create relationship, if you hold that child, as part of your kind of process, if you support the carer to mirror what you do, to become much more receptive, and you get trust in there, which is what I try and work on, you could do an amazing job. And again, I think podcasts are quite nice to have these kind of little illustrations. I remember working with a 9-year-old boy, and nobody wanted to tell this 9-year-old boy why dad was in prison, and everybody was getting themselves into all this kind of knot and whatever else.
mm,
And the judge involved in this case said this child has to know. It is not appropriate not to know. So I was asked to do the work. And so I get to know him, and it's why we love these 18 sessions. And in getting to know him, I'm hearing his story, and we get to a point where we are talking about his timeline. And I said, I know that your dad's in prison. He said, yeah, I do. He said, and I could see the tenseness of the carers. Oh my gosh, what's going to happen? And I said, do you know why people go to prison? And he looked at me and he said, oh well, because they murder their wives and rape their daughters. And I went, oh, so is that why everybody goes to prison? And he said, no, Richard, that's why my dad's in prison. And of course, sorry about that. And of course, the carers didn't know he knew, and so had been protecting him. But, I think that what I would say to everybody that might be listening to this, children, young people who have been hurt, who have, kind of seen their life being very, very dangerous, they become brilliant at vigilance and attunement. And they also have big ears.
mm,
And when I was residential worker for many years, I had an 80-20 rule, which was that my young people knew 80% of what was going on in the house to my 20%. And this
mm.
little boy, when his dad said to him, I didn't know you knew, he said, well, you and mum were arguing about it the other day when you thought Richard was coming. So what happened was they were saying, yeah, but when he finds out about dad doing this, and when he finds out about, and of course he's hearing all this, but what's he do with it? So again, if we didn't talk to him about that in this lovely process of life story work, who will talk to him about it? And now he has
Mm.
these images in his head without them
Yeah.
being, processed. And that's why, I love doing this work.
Yeah. The stories that we create, to explain our life, and that's what's going through my head at the moment.
Mm,
Um, the issue of the story the child has created, the stories the carers are left to create because they don't have, the information to
mm.
to um, create any other story other than it wasn't safe for you to be at home with mum and dad. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
What does that mean? Yeah.
the story that I mean, just to finish up on the re-traumatizing, not to
Mm,
belabor that point, but um, I found myself thinking. I mean, whilst you've been talking, I've been thinking about all the young people I've known over the years who just have no coherent story about
mm,
their life and why they came into care in the first place, why they left so many placements along the way. Um, and rather than being re-traumatizing, I think they just like to know
mm.
exactly. And in
Yeah.
actual fact, the value in it is that they can stop thinking it was their fault. It was
Yeah.
their
Yeah.
fault. It was their fault. It was their fault. It was their fault.
Mhm. Which is the common denominator, isn't it? I mean, if you're somebody
Mm,
small and you'll be brought up to think your parents are your gods, and then something
mm,
happens to you, well, it can't be God's fault. It can't be my parents'
no.
fault. And so the common denominator is it must be my fault. Like my young person I spoke about, who said, I'm in care, my sister in care because I was born. But I think it's
Mm,
also easier to take the blame in the notion of what happened. It's just much harder to live with the blame. That's
yeah,
the
I think
problem.
I think there's something in there about children who feel powerless and impotent will create stories
Mm,
that suggest that they were more influential than
yeah.
they possibly could be.
Mm,
Look, I know you're training today, and
yep.
we're up against a bit of a hard deadline. But I just wondered, you raised that a moment ago, and I wondered if you would like to say a few words about the academy that
I'd love to, if I could be a bit naughty and cheeky though, it just to finish off the model really, the third part of the model is
Of course.
the book. No, it's okay.
Mm,
And our book, many times when you do therapeutic life story work, or no, sorry, when you do life story work, sorry, a book is written, and some of the books are fantastic. And I'm not here to say you shouldn't do life story work. Some of those books are brilliant, but they're not the child's life story. They're your story of the child, and that's the bit you've got to get to understand that you're not actually doing a child's life story, you're doing a book about their life. If
mm,
you're going to do a life story book with a child, that notion of with a child comes into play. So our children, when we write up their books, on average, a child will fill in with us between 4 and 6 wallpapers. So that's about 40 to 60 meters of their storytelling. Then
mm,
someone like me would write that up, but we would use the words on the wallpaper, or we might ask the child to walk through their wallpaper and audio them. So we've got their words that we can use in their book. But then we
mm,
make the children editors in chief of their book. So what that means is they decide actually what goes in their book and what doesn't. So if they don't want a picture of dad in their book, dad's not in their book. If they don't want to have the story about, stealing chocolate cake, that's not in the book. Now most of my young people want everything, but to give them the choice is saying to them, this is your story. And then finally, most people who do these life story books and some therapeutic life story books, they bind the book. They put a bind to it
yeah.
because it looks really lovely. Please don't do that because what you'll then say to that child is when you share your book is all or nothing. So when we do our books, we put them in ring binders, literally ring binders. We
Mm.
use Polly pockets where we put the pages back to back.
Back.
We never number the pages so that if the child doesn't want to show somebody a part of their story, they can literally take those pages out and you would never know they're missing because we write the book independent pages. So we don't have a story going into the next page or
Hmm.
a theme going into the next page. What that does then, that says to that child, your story is your story to tell. Just like me, I could decide what I share with Colby and I can decide what I
Mm.
don't share with Colby. And Colby could share with me what he wants and he could decide not to share stuff with me. And if Colby and I don't like each other, it's going to be a short conversation. But if Colby and I get on with each other, we might find that we don't have enough time and it's really annoying because I want to talk longer. And this is about human relationships. And, this I think is really important to say. So I just want to finish that bit off.
Mm.
With the Care Excellence Program and Thea. So as I mentioned right at the very beginning, I've been doing social work or social care now since I was 17. I'm now 60, and I've started to feel it. And so what I wanted to do was to give something back. So in July last year, no, the year before last, I decided that we would put all our training that we offer into what's called THEA. And THEA is our Trauma Health Education International Academy. THEA also is the goddess of light, and we wanted to shine a light on best practice because there is some fantastic practice out there, but people aren't getting that light shone on that practice because of, the rapidness of everything. And the academy itself does offer lots of different training, which I'm not advertising for you guys. But what it does do, which I'm very proud of, is it provides a care excellence program, which is designed for any carer of a child or an adult, young adult that's hurting. So that would be connected carers, kidship carers, foster carers, guardians, adopters, and first year residential workers. We've been running it over here in the UK for a year and a half now. We've trained just under 1,000 people so far, and I'm funding it for 10 years. So there's another 8 and a bit years to go. Um, we're having difficulty with traction over here. I think when anything's free, people think it's not really worth it then. But of course, it's not
Mm.
free. It does cost, believe me.
Hmm.
But it's something I'm quite happy to fund. We wanted to bring it over to Australia in February this year, but we've had a few hiccups. And what we've noticed is that a lot of people from Australia are actually coming to the training because actually the timing of it works quite well with your late evenings, or not too late evenings, but you're
Mm,
like 5 to 7 or whatever it might be.
mm,
Anyway, we will be bringing it over. There will be the opportunity to bring it over with you. And obviously, I'll make that as clear as I can. We have very good relationships with many organisations in Australia, Berry Street, McKillop, and so on and so on. But we also have our own community in Australia of life story work, brilliantly led by Elise Saunders, which is called the TLSW Australia.
mhm,
And so, if anybody's interested in the CEP, it's a 5-day course. It's online, 4 hours per day. And the subjects are really attachment and child development, trauma and recovery, healing through stories, working with challenges and neurodivergent young people. And then the last one is self-care and the trouble with newts. Now, the trouble with newts is, again, Colby, you'll know this from your work, how vicarious trauma and
mm,
compassionate trauma is this thing that all of us will get. It's not a case of if. So what do we do to help ourselves be as kind of safe as possible?
mm,
And that's not just supervision, that's about a healthy lifestyle. That's about being open with yourself and being able to say, I'm not managing. So we do a whole kind of session on self-care. It's a lovely course, and I wanted to pay my respects to Anita Pell. Anita Pell used to work for Berry Street. She's now retired. And Anita and I were given the opportunity to train carers in Carer Cafe in Victoria and also
mhm,
carers across Australia in what we were calling then care success. And so, some of that early rollout became what we now have as CEP. So,
mm,
yeah, I'm hoping very much so that some point during this year, maybe in the September term, we'll be saying to Australia every 2 months, we will provide this 5-day course for those who are interested. And yeah, let's hope it makes the difference that it's making over here. The reviews we get are incredible.
wonderful. Terrific. Well, the sun's come up, it seems, behind you there, Richard.
Yeah,
You're,
the sun is up.
yeah, we were, before we started recording, we were just talking about where you were, and I was
Mhm.
assuming that, yeah, the sun hadn't come up a bit, but you're in Scotland
I'm
at
in
the moment.
Scotland. I'm actually, we have a local authority here, so like a department in Australia, who have invested in what we call the professional certificate in TLSW. So I'm just about to go over and do some training for about 20 people on their day 3 of this
Wow.
course.
Well,
So yeah, so it's a very, very popular course over here.
yeah, we'll have a great day
Thank
training,
you.
and thank you very much for making the time to come on and talk about your work. And hopefully, we might get an opportunity at another time to talk about things in even more detail. But thank you again.
You're very kind to invite me, Colby, and thank you ever so much, everybody, for taking the time to listen to this. And again, if there's anything I can do, I'm sure Colby will put contact details on. But Colby, lovely to meet. You've heard about you for quite a while, so nice to put a
Really?
name to a face. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And yeah, it's good to see that even us that have had a few years experience, still have things to learn, which what
Yeah,
you're
no,
doing is
yeah,
you're helping us learn. So thank you for that.
yeah.
And take care, everybody.
Thank you. What if there was a way to prompt parents to pause each day and reflect about parenting and what they do? What if there was a way for them to track straightforward aspects of the parenting role and how these impact the home environment? What if there was a way to feed this information back to family support services to assist with discussions about patterns and plans? What if there was a way for their daily reflections to contribute to research and best practice about the provision of nurturing homes where children grow to their full potential? What if there was a way to promote good parenting practices at scale? Well, there is a way. The Aura by Secure Start app prompts parents each day to pause and reflect about the parenting role and its contribution to the home. It encourages focus on 4 important aspects of parenting and relationships that are foundations for a healthy growing environment. Where there has been adversity, they are also foundations for repair and recovery. The Aura by Secure Start app is available in the Apple App Store. The Android version is coming soon. If you would like more information, do get in touch.